Is there a Trump-style political revolution going on in the UK? You might think this would be highly unlikely based on what we've seen happening elsewhere, because we have been watching populist parties whose leaders were even relatively lightly associated with Trump and the MAGA movement going down to defeat, whereas previously they'd been in the lead. Pierre Poilievre in Canada from a massive lead to a defeat. Peter Dutton in Australia from a lead to a defeat. Both leaders even lost their own seats in their respective elections. And in the UK, Nigel Farage, more associated with Trump than even the other two, given the number of times he shared a platform with him and been boosted by him. Well, Nigel Farage just wiped out the two other major parties in the recent local elections. Now, I talked in passing about this in a recent video, but it merits a closer look because certainly many politicians in those main parties are currently in huge disarray because they think they might be in deep trouble. But there has never been a party like Farage's Reform UK being talked about as a serious contender for government in the UK. There's no doubt that if it were to come about, it would be a seismic change in the nature of the country's politics. And you would have to ask how much of the actual authoritarian mission of Trump's MAGA that we're seeing would be carried over into such an administration. So let's discuss firstly what happened. Reform UK, Nigel Farage's party, which takes some at least of the MAGA culture war areas of focus, anti-immigration, anti-net zero, anti-DEI, had a good general election last year for a small minority party. From 0 seats, it won 5 seats. Tiny, but significant for reasons I'll explain in a minute. It was particularly significant because Farage has his sights on stealing the clothes of the UK Conservative Party, which has been struggling with the internal conflict between the radical culture war pro-Brexit wing and old-style Conservative wing. Now we had a parliamentary by-election in a seat Labour had held previously and elections for a number of local councils. Reform UK won that by-election by just 6 votes, but a huge victory given it previously had been a large majority seat for the Labour Party. On the local elections, well, from nowhere, 0 council seats, Reform UK won the most seats in the election, 677. It won outright control of 10 local councils. They took seats from both the Conservatives and from Labour, and their success was taken by many as reflecting widespread disillusionment in the country and a demand for change. As one commentator said in the Financial Times, voters are going to keep demanding change until someone finally gives it to them. How much does this mean? Unlike the Australian and Canadian elections, these were local elections, not choosing to run the government. There is historically a big difference in voters' willingness to cast votes for minority parties in such elections. But the vote was so large, the fact that numerous councils will now be run by Reform, that a lot of people are wondering if this is the moment that broke the two-party system in the United Kingdom. Could indeed a form of Trumpism actually be on its way to taking over in the UK in 2029? 3 things to understand about UK politics as it has been up until this point. First of all, it is a parliamentary system, with first-past the post elections, which tends to result in a favourable political landscape for major parties and a strong likelihood that a government will have at least a bare majority in Parliament. Second, for many decades, voting patterns used to swirl around a large number of safe blocks for each of the 2 main parties. The Labour Party commanded the loyalty, if not the affection, of the traditionally working-class constituencies. The Conservative Party commanded the loyalty of the wealthier middle-class voters and where they congregated. Every election, there were many seats across the country that were considered safe seats for one or other of those parties, based on the strength of that affiliation. Third, because it's a parliamentary system, winning parties get to actually govern, unlike in the US, where gridlock in the legislature can often stymie the programme of a president. And so governments tend to tack to the centre because they know they're going to get held to account for the things they actually do. The centre of politics, of course, is where floating voters like me live. So radical left parties or radical right parties, they can get enough of a base to make a loud noise, enough to get a handful of MPs, but the winning party has always tended to be within sight, at least, of the centre ground. Now, whether their political opponents would grant them that that's where they are is another thing, because activists will always see their opponents as extremists as well as seeing themselves as moderates. And maybe they're right, who knows? But when it comes to elections, if your view on that differs to that of the electorate as a whole, you'll find out pretty quickly which holds the most sway. The top priorities for the electorate always seemed to be that A, they should be within sight of the centre ground, and B, they should be competent. Basically competent. If you were lucky enough to have two choices that passed that relatively low bar, then you could indulge yourself and vote for your favoured policy preferences in good conscience. And I say relatively low bar, it's not that often we had two that actually passed it at the same time, so I suppose you could debate how low it really is. Now, okay, that's how it has been, how it was. All of that got blown apart around the time of Brexit. The Labour Party was dead against Brexit, but the groundswell of support for it very much rose up in many of their traditional, safe constituencies. The political dividing line in the UK seemed to shift from a class-based one to a localism versus globalism-based one. As a result, the volatility of votes in the UK has massively increased. You could say not since 2015 has there been an election where there was actually a majority vote for the status quo. Many seats that used to be safe for their party can no longer be taken for granted, which is probably a good thing. But it has introduced this new possibility. There's a lot in common between the hungry for change Brexit voters and the demographic that have been Donald Trump's base supporters. Now, Boris Johnson was elected Prime Minister in 2019, pretty much on the support of that group, as he promised to get Brexit done in the face of numerous attempts in Parliament to block it or to water it down. And he was Donald Trump-like in that while he got elected on a promise that resonated with that group, it turned out that in practice he was not competent. He benefited from having an opponent in the election who was not seen as much better on the competence front and was seen as much further from the centre ground. But his government was a shambles. Yes, Brexit got done, but it was widely seen to have been negotiated with an embarrassingly low amount of skill, resulting in what many suspected was a worse and more painful deal than necessary, purely out of ideological preference. And then it was particularly shambolic during the COVID-19 pandemic. We had the government changing the rules pretty much every couple of days, micromanaging people's lives to a ridiculous extent. At one point, you could go to a pub so long as you were having a substantial meal while you were there rather than just a drink. And there was lots of debate as the government had to rule on whether having a Scotch egg was a substantial enough meal to qualify, as if the virus would be dissuaded if you had a Scotch egg in front of you. Meanwhile, it emerged they were partying like it was 2018 in secret, treating their own rules with the casual contempt that people assumed they also treated the electorate with. And also, under Johnson's new Brexit regime, immigration into the country massively spiked, which was not what people thought they were voting for in the referendum. So they were out, and the Brexit voting electorate ended up voting for Labour, largely because Brexit seemed to have been achieved, Labour were not challenging to reverse that in any way, and the Tories were in such a shambles, had been in a shambles for so long, had been in office for too long, they just wanted to get rid of them, to get them out of their sight for at least a few years. Labour didn't inspire them with an alternative, but they were the alternative. They were competent, if boring. After years of chaos, boring seemed okay for now. Very quickly, they're looking for evidence of that change again. Labour's doing a few things that they might even approve of, but being notably poor in communicating them, so people don't know that they're even doing them. And then it's done some things that have infuriated them. By all accounts, on the doorsteps in the recent election, Labour candidates were reporting fury at the party's move on cutting winter fuel allowance for pensioners. The Tories, meanwhile, are still in disarray, so the moment was perfect for Nigel Farage, a highly effective campaigner, to project his party into the sizable gap. And what we've seen in the few days since the election is that Reform UK people, whoever they are, because mostly people have only heard of Farage, they seem to be enthusiastically cosplaying Donald Trump. Indeed, in some ways it brings to mind how some left-wing Black Lives Matter campaigners who, when they did protests in London in the wake of George Floyd, would chant at the police, "Hands up, don't shoot." And even people who supported the spirit of their cause had to say, that's just ridiculous, because it's an import from the US and the British police are unarmed. I mean, it's just taking what happens over there and applying it over here in apparent total ignorance of what you're actually doing, and that it's not the same thing. Well, so it has been here. So we've seen Dame Andrea Jenkins, for instance, who was elected mayor in Lincolnshire for Reform UK, talking about how she was immediately going to be sacking DEI managers from the council. The answer came back, they don't have any DEI managers. Other Reform UK councillors who are taking over councils have said that they were looking to do an Elon Musk Doge job on their councils, and they expected to shave 10% of waste out of the budget by doing so. Now, it's hard to believe that anyone who's actually been following the Doge process would think it would be a good idea to do it yourself. But again, very quickly, the message came back, you're off your head. Anyone active in UK politics knows that for decades, local councils have been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed again on funding from the government and how much they're allowed to make up for it in council tax. While there are undoubtedly badly run councils to be found, they don't complacently sit on 10% waste, because for years they've just had to cut whatever fat they ever had just to survive. But yes, with these various early statements, it's clear that cosplaying MAGA is all they've got right now. I'm not sure they're going to find that's what their constituents are really hungry for, but we'll see. The thing is, while Farage's style and messaging is popular, the UK really does not like Donald Trump. If Farage continues to do well with the Brexit supporting areas, he could undoubtedly grow a strong, noisy challenger party, but it wouldn't be enough to get into government. The Financial Times quoted one 51-year-old business owner in Durham, someone who would be absolutely right in Reform's target group. He told them that in his view, Farage is still too extreme and particularly, quote, attracts a lot of undesirables to his cause. And he added, we've got to stand up on our own without cozying up too much to Trump. I would take that expression of view as the central challenge to Farage. British voters are still not attracted to extremism. They're still turned off by followers who are too crazy and don't like the things that are associated solely with Trump. So long as Reform is made up of political amateurs who seem to be playing the part, it's hard to see that he can achieve what he would need to in order to actually win an election, to project himself as the head of a government in waiting. Because we are not, remember, a presidential system. One person, however charismatic, does not a government make. And right now, since Reform UK is committed to mad MAGA ideas, such as pretending that climate change doesn't exist, at least toying with the idea that Vladimir Putin is a fine fellow, it's hard to see it breaking past those final hurdles. What it is, however, doing is forcing all the other parties to engage with the issues that it highlights in ways that they otherwise might not have done. Now, the main parties may all be fighting internally about how they do that right now, with Labour split between the people who want to do some reform light stuff on immigration, maybe tone net zero down just a bit, hoping that will be enough to keep its voters from switching, with the Conservatives split between those who want the party to go in full throttle culture wars mode to win back the Reform defectors against those who want the party to return more solidly to the sensible centre. But these internal battles are presumably the prelude to their adjusted public position, whether they decide to tack towards or decisively away from Nigel Farage. Still too early to give up on the two-party system in the UK. Proof of the pudding will always be the actual general election vote. But there's no doubt the main parties are in trouble, because they are not effective communicators right now. They are not good campaigners. They are being shown up by a shell of a party, a Potemkin village of a party, nothing there except for a big picture of Nigel Farage. And they are being rattled because he shares in common with Donald Trump the ability to campaign, to exploit fears, to jump onto topical events and to make them his own. That would never have been enough to get a man into number 10 Downing Street for as long as I've been alive and paying attention to politics. The question is a more open one. In this new, more volatile, more fragmented, polarised age, with all the toxic disinformation campaigns, all the disaffected voters who feel that they've been left out. So if I was an MP in one of the existing parties, watching my leadership moving like they're walking through treacle, yeah, I'd be pretty nervous about now. If they could all take it as the prompt to up their game, to become serious about the change they want to bring about, what they stand for, and actually campaign for it, that would be at least one good thing all round that Nigel Farage would undoubtedly have achieved.